Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that wants to storm the walls of your castle and see what's hidden in your keep.
Books, 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 books.
I am your host, Grace Todd, writer, editor, book gremlin. And with me today is bestie of the pod and Chaucerian lady about town, Toni DiNardo. Hey, babe.
Hi.
How you doing?
It's 2 weeks until the start of the semester, and I haven't finalized the lesson plans for the unit I'm teaching on medieval game studies. So it's going great. It's really good.
Never
How
better.
are you?
I mean, well, hopefully by the time this actually airs, your semester will be well underway, and you'll have somehow wrangled it all together, just in time for the hopeful youths who are you are going to share all of your knowledge with. Right? It's gonna be fine, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, it'll be great.
Everything's gonna be fine.
Oh, come on! You ask how I'm doing, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm living the life.
Never better. The standard white person response of like, it's going, and you're like, oh no.
At least I think about last fall semester at UNC, and I think to myself that, like, it would take literally a school shooting for it to be worse. So, in that sense, I'm very hopeful about this semester.
Oh my God. I feel bad for laughing at that. But what else can you do at a certain point? So we are off to we've got ennui. We are organized. We are on top of our game. And we are returning to the Canterbury Tales, which we have been visiting in a sort of scattered fashion through last season and now this season. We're on like a pilgrimage with many detours as we make our way through.
Wait, does this podcast have seasons?
Yeah.
Oh my God, we got a season 2. You're doing better than like 70% of like Netflix shows. 90% if you're talking about Netflix shows with queer leads.
That's true. And what does this podcast have if not queer leads? We're basically a queer ensemble show.
I love it.
So Chaucer.
Chaucer.
Where are we? Where did we leave off in like just a couple sentences?
We left off at the end of Fragment 3 with the friar and summoner's wonderful tales poking fun at each other. Remember, we were farting demons.
Yes.
Farting friars. Demons farting friars was where we left it. And we pick up today with Fragment 4. I think the next couple fragments, I want to kind of slow it down a bit and do just 2 stories at a time, because the next couple fragments are each 2 stories that are sort of inextricably linked with each other. Fragment 4 is a pair of stories about marriage. They're part of like a larger group of stories known as the Marriage Group, which includes The Wife of Bath's prologue. It includes The Shipman's Tale. But Fragment 4 is kind of a special thing in and of itself, in that it's 2 very tightly linked stories about marriage that depict very different kinds of marriages.
So this is our marriage story episode.
Yes, marriage stories. We're going to hear about the joys and pitfalls of marriage.
Yay!
So Fragment 4, we have 2 storytellers. We have the clerk, who is a clerk of Oxford. He's a scholar, a sort of medieval academic from Oxford University, which at, the point of the Canterbury Tales is being written is already some 400 years old. No, 300, sorry. Math. Bad at math. He's a character who is presented in much less mocking tones than many of the characters in the Canterbury Tales are, which is somewhat unsurprising because he's a very Chaucerian character. In many ways, the clerk, though it's unclear whether Chaucer ever went to university, we know he studied at the Inns of Court, he studied law, but we don't know if he ever went to university. But Chaucer is himself very much an academic. And the character of the clerk is a character that in some ways is more Chaucer-like than the actual character of Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, who is a bit of a bumbling fool with no real talent at storytelling, which the clerk is not. The clerk is well educated. His story, though, he tells it in a very simple style at the request of the host. His story is, very erudite. It's full of a lot of classical references. But this is a man who very much lives in an ivory tower.
Right.
The other character in this fragment, the flip side to this, is the merchant, who is kind of consummate worldliness. He's also depicted in fairly good terms. He's not, a con man or anything like that. He's a reliable business person. He knows how to make a good profit, but he's still honorable and well-spoken and genteel. He has close links to the textile industry in what's now the Netherlands, in Flanders, which is significant for the time in which it's taking place because Britain, or England at the time, has this sort of complex relationship with the Low Countries. On the one hand, it trades a lot with what's now the Netherlands, but on the other hand, there's also a lot of racial antagonism. In fact,
wait, racial antagonism? Are these not
I
all
guess ethnic?
Are these not all white people?
These are all white people. But we're looking at a sort of medieval race before race kind of idea of, the English especially conceive themselves in this very insular way.
Sure.
In a way that is actually quite out of place for the rest of Europe, which is a lot more cosmopolitan. England's main links to the continent are through France and through the Low Countries. And so they have these uneasy relationships with both of those countries. I mean, obviously we think of England and France in the Middle Ages, and we think Henry V and Agincourt, and we think of England trying to assert dominance over France and Joan of Arc and all of this stuff.
If you needed any more evidence that whiteness is a construct.
Absolutely. But yeah, so you have this somewhat antagonistic relationship towards the Flemings, to the point that during the Peasants' Revolt, during the reign of Richard II, you even have some rounding up and mass killings of Flemish merchants.
Oh no!
Now, the merchant himself doesn't appear to be Flemish, but he is certainly linked to the Low Countries. He's described as wearing a Flemish hat. He's described as being very invested in making sure that the crown protects the seas between England and Holland.
And this is faintly sus, maybe?
I don't know that it's sus. It's just indicative of his status in England in the time. He is really the quintessential English merchant. The connection to the Flemings gives this air of verisimilitude to it.
Okay.
And it also depicts his worldliness. He's well-traveled, and this is interesting when we get into the two stories because the Merchant's Tale kind of stands out as the realist version of marriage as opposed to this more idealized thing that shows up in the Clerk's Tale.
Inside of you there are two wolves. A merchant and an academic.
There are two medieval men inside of you. This is no longer a Safe for Work podcast.
I mean, if we're storming the walls of your castle, you're going to need at least two medieval men to do it.
So the clerk, first off, the clerk actually gets called out by Harry Bailey at the start of the fragment for being too dour. He's basically a noble clerk. Why are you just sitting there with this fucking sourpuss face? You haven't said a word all day, and you're just clearly all up in your heads. This isn't college. Get out of your head, college boy. Tell us a happy story. Tell us a merry tale.
It's nice to know that academics just do not change.
No, I mean, this is the problem with academia is we all still think that we're monks, like living in our like little abbeys siloed off from the rest of the world, and then the world starts to interact with us and we're like, what the this isn't supposed to happen. And it's like, yeah. And now, because we spent way too long being elitist and siloed, now, the universities are getting taken over by fascists who we just kind of let take over.
Yeah.
Anyway, that got grim.
Whoopsie doodle.
But yeah, no, academics have not changed. So Harry Bailey asks the clerk to tell them a merry tale, which, like, probably at this point we're all into the Canterbury Tales enough to know that, like, what the clerk thinks is a merry tale is probably going to be an absolute nightmare.
He's like, again, academics do not change. It's just like, no. You're going to find this so funny. And then it is the driest, most niche anecdote about someone you've never heard of in a fight with someone else you've never heard of. And you're like, that's really fun. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hilarious.
You don't think we're funny? Well, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Last time I show up. You're very funny, sweetie. We're very funny.
So the clerk tells a story. This is one, like several of Chaucer's stories, that he gets from Petrarch. And this one, even like in the narrative, is acknowledged as coming from Petrarch because the clerk, the character of the clerk, says that he heard the story from Petrarch when he was in Italy. Petrarch, in turn, got the story from Boccaccio.
He's like, I was studying abroad and I heard this story from Petrarch.
But also, like, that's so Chaucer. This is one of the ways in which the clerk is very Chaucer, because he's like, yeah, I've been to Italy. I was a diplomat, actually. I know Petrarch and Boccaccio. I think we're actually not positive whether he ever met Boccaccio, but he probably did.
But he can say he did, and that's what counts.
Yeah, who's going to know? You don't have the money to go to Italy and meet Boccaccio. And so it's a story. It shows up in Boccaccio's Decameron. It's actually the final story of the Decameron. It's the 10th day, 10th story, which is amazing. I was watching Netflix's new Decameron, which is, it's not like very meaningfully an adaptation of the Decameron in that, like, there's no storytelling contest, there's no different stories. It's just kind of this show about like a bunch of insane people trying to get away from the plague and driving each other nuts.
Okay.
And they kind of like weave elements of different stories from the Decameron into that narrative, but it's its own narrative. But it's one of those ones that's actually very good, though, in like capturing what the Decameron does, which is this sort of like slice of life estate satire that has sort of comedies of error and comedies of manners and all these different, things with marriage plots and stuff like this. It takes the kind of kernel of the Decameron and the type of comedy and the type of drama and the type of romance that shows up in the Decameron and then turns it into something that is really enjoyable to a modern audience. But I was quite amused to get to the end of the show, and it ends with a couple characters sitting around telling each other stories. It's one of the only times in the show that storytelling like actually comes up as an element. And they're sitting around telling each other stories, and as the like camera sort of blacks out or does whatever they do to like fade out of the scene, one of the characters starts to tell a story that is clear from its beginning to be the tale of Griselda, which is the tale that shows up on day 10, story 10 of the Decameron, and is the tale that the clerk tells in Fragment 4 of the Canterbury Tales. So,
all right.
We start, as all good stories in this fragment do, in Lombardy.
Those Lombards.
Lombards. We start with a Lombard marquis named Walter, who is well loved by his people, well regarded. He's, young and vigorous. He's a wise ruler. He's doughty in battle and all these things. The only complaint that his people have about him is that they are anxious that he should marry and have an heir and live in blissful wedlock. And so they come to him one day, all the like noblemen of the town, and they're like, "Bro, you got to get married. Like,
Buddy.
you're like 30 or whatever. It's time to get wed."
You're like 30 or whatever. You could die at any moment. We don't know.
Exactly.
Have some sons and heirs.
It's amazing. Like, I think that is one of those rare things that has really come through into like modern medievalist fiction quite well, is so many medieval stories that start with people being like, "Bro, you gotta air up, like you gotta get you that son."
I think it is really hard for contemporary people in a society where everything, like by default, by necessity, goes to the eldest son. I think it's really hard for us to understand how much having a clear heir apparent at every level of society was the only thing you could do to attempt to maintain some kind of political stability for yourself.
Yeah. It also makes me wonder how much everyone like hated their like brothers and shit, that like the worst thing you could imagine was your nephew or whatever like getting the title. Like,
yeah, well, nobody knows him. Well, and there's also like the persistent taint of being the second son, right? Like there is an
the whole heir and the spare thing.
Yeah, like there's always an impression that the second son just, in a sort of eugenicsy, like by birth, he's just never as good as the first son, which is why Henry VIII had such a chip on his goddamn shoulder. Anyway.
But it's also so funny because like so many second sons end up inheriting through history, and like so many of them, you'll see these ones where it was like, yeah, you see the ones where like, yeah, Arthur was held up as, prince of the realm, the best guy who's ever lived. No, he's dead. Now we've got poor, Henry. But like you also had plenty where like the first son wasn't shit, and like the second son ended up inheriting and was great. And it's like, you'd think with the like youth mortality rates that you had in the Middle Ages that you might prepare a little better for the second son.
The whole system only works if you think that there's something magical about first sons, right? Because if there's nothing magical about first sons, then like what the is this system?
I don't know.
So you kind of, by necessity, you kind of have to be like, no. The first male to come out of the womb has like special science nature magic appended to his little baby penis.
Yeah. And the other one's just Faramir. Like
Faramir. Sean Bean.
I was watching the extended edition of The Two Towers the other day, and I forgot how much like Denethor is so much worse in the extended edition. Like he's full on just like, yeah, Faramir sucks. That guy, like,
I hate my surviving son. What a tit.
Well, but like even before he's dead, there's like the scene where like Boromir is like trying to give him shit for constantly being a dick to Faramir, and he's like, "I well know Faramir's uses and they're few," and it's like, oh come on, dude, that's such a dick thing to say about your son who's like 2 feet away from you. Like,
not surprising that like J.R.R. Tolkien, doting father, when called upon to make like a borderline irredeemable villain, is like, he's a dad.
That's fair, actually. Yeah. So I mean, he was great to Christopher. I think, like,
yeah,
he was always glowing about his father.
Complicated man, but a very good father, at least to his sons.
Yeah.
I know nothing about any daughters he may or may not have had.
I don't know if he had any daughters, but I think like we can just assume that, at least to his sons is probably a fair assessment.
Anyway, moral of the story, the patriarchy, desperately important to know that the man in charge of all of the land that you're living on has a son handy, because otherwise who knows who's going to swoop in and take it all over. So you got to have some kids.
So he's got to have some kids. They're like, look, and we'll make it easy for you. We will choose a wife for you. We'll do all the work. You just have to get wed. And he's like, no, I shall listen to my people and what they want. But also, I'll pick my own wife because I've resolved to only have the right wife, to have the wife for me. And so he looks all around the town. All he finds is Earl.
Goodbye. All right.
Okay, so his desire alights upon Griselda, the poor daughter of a local farmer who is, the most diligent woman. She works all day and all night. She's never idle. She never backtalks her father. She's never gossipy. She's perfect. She's not like other girls. She's a doormat.
Uh-huh.
And he goes to her and he's like, Griselda, I want to have you for my wife. I am resolved to have you for my wife. You're the only wife that I want, and I'll take you away right now to live in my castle with fancy food and clothes and servants and as long as you will promise to always be obedient to me. Never to say no when I say yes. Never to grouch or complain like other women do. To always be obedient and to always do as I desire.
It sounds like he's Earl.
Yeah, he is definitely Earl. So she agrees because, I don't know, what could be more enticing than being a personality-less sex slave to some dude?
I mean, it reduces your risk of starving to death next winter, so that's fun.
That's true. So she agrees, and he has his serving women strip off her clothes right there and dress her in finery, and they go off to the castle and they get wed.
It's like, I brought a wedding dress with me.
Yeah. They quickly have a child. The first child is a daughter, but the people of the village are okay with that because she's fertile, so she'll have a son in time. And when the daughter is about 4 years old, though, it comes into Walter's mind to test his wife, to test her loyalty.
I'm not loving the direction this is headed.
Yeah, it's not good. So he's like, my wife is great. She never complains. She never fusses at me. She never disagrees with anything. The people love her. She rules my... What does a marquis rule? Is it just a duchy? Do marquises also have duchies? I don't know. Anyway, my realm.
Land and household.
Yeah, she governs well when I'm away, and she takes care of things. But you can never quite know. So I'm going to make sure that she is as loyal and uncomplaining as she seems to be by testing her. It comes into his mind to assay her.
So I'm not content with just controlling her behavior. I need to know that I am also controlling her inside thoughts.
Exactly. Well, that I can do anything and she won't complain. So he hires one of his men-at-arms.
I've read a fetish novel along these lines, I'm pretty sure.
No, not these lines. He sends the man-at-arms into the chamber where Griselda is with their daughter, with orders to take the child. So we have this scene. The sergeant, the man-at-arms, walks into the chambers, and we have this exchange. Madam, he said, ye mote forgivet me. Though I do thing to which ye am constrained, ye been so wise that full well know ye, that Lordes Hestus mo not been feigned. They mo well been bewailed or complained, but men mote need unto her lust obey. And so, Wally, there is no more to say. This chilled Iam commanded for to talk, and spake no more, but oat the chilled he hent, dispiteously and gan a chiller mark, as though he wold him slain it ere he went. Grisildis mote all suffer and all consent, and as a lamb she sitteth meek and still, and let this cruel sergeant do his will. So he grabs the child and he makes like he's going to cut his throat before he's even out the door. But he stops and he talks with her briefly and is like, look, I have to do this. The Lord has commanded it. And she's like, of course. Whatever my husband commands, so shall it be. I only ask if you'll tell me this, and I understand if you can't, will you at least promise to bury my daughter where the dogs and vultures and beasts of the field won't eat her body? And the guy's like, no, I can't promise that, goodbye, and leaves.
What the fuck?
He takes the 4-year-old to Walter, who of course is like, oh, my darling baby girl, I would never do anything to hurt you. Take her, my precious child, to Burgundy, maybe? I want to say Burgundy.
Wait, you have a whole fancy cat. You can't just hide a 4-year-old somewhere for a bit. You have to ship them off internationally.
Yep. When it's to his brother-in-law, I believe, his sister's husband, and is like, I want you to raise this child as your foster in all gentleness and love. Treat her well, raise her well, teach her well, but don't let anyone, and I think it's implied even the girl, don't let anyone know who her parents actually are.
Okay.
And so some time goes by. Griselda uncomplainingly continues to worship her husband and do everything that he wants. She has a son. And, Walter is content. Until he's not.
What is up with this fucking dude?
This dude is the worst. Walter is horrible.
What is setting him off? I understand he's an in all of these stories, right? These aren't even really 3-dimensional characters. They're essentially living allegories, but also dude.
Well, and so here's the thing is when you're like, what the is the worst part comes in when you start to think about who Walter really is allegorically and who Griselda is. And then you're like, oh, is God a dick? Because Griselda is Job.
Oh.
Self-consciously in the story, Griselda is Job. She's even compared to Job. And Walter is God. So yeah, he's a dick, but also is he?
I mean,
because if he is, that raises some serious theological problems. So Walter's happy with a son and a loyal wife until he decides that, maybe he's not, and maybe she's not perfect. And actually, he needs to test her again. So he gets his trusty man-at-arms to go to Griselda, and he's basically like, look, G. So as it turns out, the people are really unhappy. They're like, man, he married some peasant-ass bitch, and now she gave him this gutter son, and that's not who we want for the heir. We don't want some peasant baby. So I'm gonna have to kill this one too. So, and they go through the whole same thing. She's like, that's fine. Of course, whatever my husband desires. Could you maybe see your way to not throwing my son's mutilated corpse into a field to be eaten by wild animals? No? Okay, that's fine. I'm still not complaining.
No can do, babe.
Walter does all his shit again. He's like, okay, send this kid off to my brother-in-law, have him raised as a page and eventually as a knight and, trained in all the ways of governance and the battlefield and all of these things. Don't ever let him know who his parents are, though. So a few years pass, and at this point, Walter is content and the story ends. No. Come on. No, he's got to do it again. So he comes to Griselda and he's like, here's the thing. Actually, everyone is really mad that I married a peasant, which isn't true. Everyone in the like realm is like, poor Griselda, this guy sucks. But Walter's like, yeah, no, they hate you. They hate that I married a peasant. He like conspires with the Pope to have fake papal bulls sent to him endorsing the annulment of his marriage to Griselda and allowing him to remarry in order to keep the peace with his people. And he's like, look, the people hate you. The Pope hates you.
Oh my God.
The Pope says I've got to remarry.
Babe, it's not my fault. The Pope hates you.
Yeah. So he's like, so you're going to have to go back to your hovel with your dad, who apparently has like been living in the hovel all these years. It's unclear. Like, what the fuck?
It's just... Yeah, like my daughter is my landlord now, but I'm still in the hovel.
Yeah, well, because the thing is, later in the story, they'll explicitly mention the dad being taken to live in the castle. So it's like, wait, was he just in the hovel all this time? Like, that wasn't test enough? You had to, like, fake kill her kids and now divorce her?
Sending her little notes every winter being like, hey, honey, it's a little cold. I'm a little hungry.
Yeah, so So Walter's like, off with you, back to your hovel, leave all your fancy shit. It's going to be for my new, better wife. And she's like, of course, husband, you are so wise. All I ask is, as you may recall, you stripped me of the weeds I was wont to wear before you brought me here. I have no clothes fitting my station here, no clothes of mine, only the dresses that you've given me. Might I ask of you simply a dress of similar quality to the ones I used to wear? And Walter, very magnanimously, is like, you know, you can have the one dress you're wearing. That's my gift to you. And even that, she's very much like, well, that's too much, and just like strips down just to like her smock.
Oh my God.
And goes home. Walter sends off to his brother-in-law, and he's like, I want you to bring my children here. And I want you to advertise that my daughter, who I haven't done all the math, but as best I can tell, can't be older than like 13.
Oh no.
That my daughter is a young noblewoman being brought to me to be my new bride.
Oh no. Because imagine this from the daughter's perspective.
Well, but I don't think the daughter knows that she's his daughter at this point, but I don't think that's going to make it better in the end.
Yeah,
but I don't think PTSD wasn't invented in the Middle Ages. So
that's what I'm saying. Is like, all right, hun, you're finally getting married. You're going to go run a household of your own. Here is your new husband. Just kidding. He's your father. What?
I suppose that makes this 45-year-old man slightly better, but like... So, to add insult to injury, though, Walter goes to Griselda and he's like, you know, I realized, you know what I need is a wedding planner. I need someone who can get my house in good order, because, like, actually it's... No one else really is, like, qualified to run this wedding, so can you, like, get shit ready for my new wife and, like, prepare for the wedding and all of that?
This would have been a significantly more compelling setup for the Jennifer Lopez vehicle, The Wedding Planner.
I think you know where this is going.
Yes.
She says yes, of course, so kindly. She wants to make everything good for his new wife. And on the day that the like new bride is set to arrive, she is there watching the procession, ready to basically heap blessings on the new wife because she's just so perfect.
She's just so nice.
This is the point at which Walter finally gives up the game. And he's like, look, you've been perfect. I've been lying to you. This is your daughter. This is your son. She breaks down in tears, thanking God for, the fact that her children have been returned to her. And then everyone lives happily ever after. You know, the people are suddenly happy with everyone again. Griselda's dad gets brought to live in the castle because, I can't stress this enough, he was apparently in the hovel this whole time. The daughter gets married off to like a brave knight, and the son in time comes to rule Walter's Marchuchy. I don't what does a marquis rule?
I don't know. I can't remember.
And yeah, you know, everything ends happily. And there's this sort of advice to good wives to be like Griselda, to be long suffering, as Job was with God, so as Griselda was with her husband. This is how wives should be in marriage.
Jesus fucking Christ.
And this is one of those things, you know, there is this question of how seriously we should take this like admonition.
Right.
Because on the one hand, we have the way in which like the story is ludicrous, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Walter is obviously the bad guy. And yet, is he? Because if Walter's the bad guy, then God's the bad guy. Because I mean,
Right.
the relationship between Job and God is explicitly likened to the relationship between Walter and Griselda. The relationship between husband and wife is, you know, at least somewhat of a like reflection of the relationship between God and church. Like that's you know,
Yeah.
the church is the spouse of Christ.
Yeah, no, that's like, I know people who had to do like the religious, you know, you sit down with the priest before you get married thing, and the priest overtly was like, so he's God and you're the church, and that's how this goes. That is a very explicit parallel that is still being made, which is super healthy.
Yeah, no, I mean my parents did that shit when they got married. And so, like, you know, there is this point where it's like, well, how much can this be critiqued or considered sarcastic or whatnot? Because if Walter's a dick, then God's a dick, and you've got like a serious theological problem. And there is like a degree to which this depiction of Griselda, like as it first appears in the Decameron and then in Plutarch's translation, is a very sort of serious depiction. Generally speaking, it's seen as a story in which Boccaccio is trying to depict womanly virtue. We have this way in which Chaucer's other works that involve like sort of good women, including the Legend of Good Women, frequently depict these sort of like very servile, long-suffering women. And I mean, going forward, Griselda continues to be held up as like a very real example of wifely constancy. In The Taming of the Shrew, reference is made to Griselda as like a counterpoint to the character of Catherine, I think.
I was thinking about that actually. Some of the stuff, there's some parallels there, and in the culmination of The Taming of the Shrew, which is, you know, that's the whole idea, is you will not only not resist me in your actions, but like in your mind.
Right. And it's a sort of breaking that I think Walter does, and that in turn, like Petruchio does. Like it is a breaking that is very Jobish. I don't know if that's a word, but
It is now.
this is the appropriate relationship where I can do anything and you will simply be thankful for getting to be my wife and hopeful of, or not even hopeful of, sure of your future blessings.
I mean, that's still a model of marriage that we see held up in like different religious communities.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think about like, you know, like Bill Goddard and like some of his shit. And I mean, yeah, it's definitely still there.
I have read many accounts of women who were in explicitly abusive relationships and seeking advice from their elders, from their pastors, from people they respected, and were basically told like, well, if you just sort of bow to him in this like totally consuming godlike fashion, then like what could he possibly be angry at?
Well, I think this is even we look at like the pre-modern concept of petty treason. You know, you have high treason, which are crimes committed against the crown, and like high treason, the reason it is such a bad thing is because the crown is God on earth, God's reflection on earth. As God rules earth, kings rule men. And the reason why petty treason, which involves all sorts of crimes ranging from like wives assaulting their husbands to apprentices assaulting their masters, is it's all part of what the Elizabethans would eventually come to think of as the great chain of being. The way in which like all social relationships are ultimately like the relationship between God and man, just like in smaller and smaller doses. And so petty treason is a treason in the same way that high treason is, because it's a violation of that relationship, that godlike relationship between master and servant, husband and wife.
It's treason against the patriarchy.
Exactly.
Quite literally.
So there is a definite way in which we should take the tale of Griselda fairly seriously. I think this gets back to the whole, like, sometimes just taking the Canterbury Tales at its word.
You mean Geoffrey Chaucer wasn't a feminist icon?
No. Contrary to popular belief among some medievalists, he was not a feminist icon. And proving that he didn't rape Cecily Champagne did not actually get rid of all the problematic shit in his work.
Okay, but he was a pretty talented comedian, so please tell me that following the shot of that story, we are getting a chaser.
Of course we are.
Yay! He might not have been a feminist, but he knew how jokes worked.
So The Merchant's Tale is much more comedic. It's often argued whether it's a fablio or not. It certainly has some like precursors in several popular fablio of cuckoldry and
yes,
whatnot. But it's very much, it is a counterpoint to The Clerk's Tale in that while The Clerk's Tale depicts the idealized perfect wife, the merchant, who first off, his prologue is basically just being like, alas, I wish I had a Griselda. I have a bitch wife. Call me Susan. I miss the kids. The Merchant's Tale is about the fact that, you know, marriage isn't really like that. This isn't what women are like. And this is very in keeping too with the fact that, like, the clerk is the learned ivory tower character and the merchant is the guy who lives in the real world. So he's basically like, yeah, women aren't like that. I'm going to tell a story about what women are really like. And so he tells the story of an aged knight of 60 years named January.
Good name.
Yeah, can you guess what the wife's name will be?
Oh, is it going to be something springtimey?
It's May.
Oh.
January and May.
Uh-huh. I did not realize how old that joke was.
That joke's as old as time.
As old as Father Time.
Oh my god. So,
sorry.
January is a bachelor of 60 years. He's lived his life for hunting and game and, you know, very much content, but he hits 60 and it comes into his mind that he should get married to secure himself an heir. And also, he is convinced that marriage is a certain state of perfection. And there's this speech that he gives where he talks about wives, and he says, "A whiff, Saint Mary Benedicite, how micht a man han any adversity that hath a whiff? Certes, he cannot say. The bliss which that is betwixt him and tway. There may no tongue tell or hair to think. If he be poorer, she help him to swink. She capeth his good, and wasteth never a dale. All that her husband lust, he licketh well. She saith not once nay, when he saith yea. Do this, saith he. Already, sir, saith she. O blissful order of wedlock precious! Thou art so merry, and eke so virtuous, and so commended in a praved ake, that every man that held him worth a lake. Upon his bare knees ocht all his life, thanking his God that him hath sent a whiff, or else pray to God him for to send a whiff to last until his leave's end." So he's like, being married is perfect. Everybody loves being married. Poor men, their wives help them work. They never say no. They always agree with what their husbands want. And he calls to his nobles to sort of hear his intent. And in particular, he calls on his two brothers, Placebo, which means I please, I believe, and is the where we get the modern word placebo.
Oh, okay.
I please or I placate. And Justinius, which means like justice or fairness.
Okay.
Placebo, as you can imagine from his name, is like, you're completely right. Everything you're saying is right. I've heard a lot of people be right, and you are the rightest. No one has ever been righter. Your understanding of marriage is perfect. And Justinius is like, bitches suck. Don't do it, bro.
So we've got the romantic and the misogynist.
Exactly.
Okay.
Women are terrible. She's going to make you a cuckold, especially because January makes it clear that he won't have any wife older than 20. He doesn't want a 30-year-old. He wants a young woman.
I don't want an old hag. I want a child.
Exactly. Like he outright says, like, I have no taste for a woman of 30.
It's also known as the Leonardo DiCaprio method.
Exactly, yeah. So, of course, Justinius, cites some well-known anti-feminist literature. In particular, he cites Theophrastus, who was one of the main sort of, theological critics of marriage and the married condition. He references Seneca and whatnot. And January naturally hears only what he wants to hear. He basically says to Justinius, to hell with Seneca. Who gives a shit about Seneca? I'm right. I'm getting married.
Seneca's dead and I'm alive and I need to get my dick wet.
And also, wanting to get his dick wet is very much part of it. He talks at length about the fact that, he would be legally and licitly able to take his pleasure in a wife. That is a big part of why he wants to get married.
I'm tired of thinking God is mad at me every time I have sex.
Yeah. He wants to have an heir and he wants to So he looks about Lombardy, because this is also taking place in Lombardy. Both these stories are in Lombardy.
The fucking Lombards again.
And he settles on a beautiful young woman named May.
Mm-hmm.
He basically tells his people, he's like, look, no one is to second guess me in this choice. I'm in love. I want her. Justinius grumbles a little bit about it, but then, they are married. The priest comes and blesses them. There's this scene in which they're at the wedding feast. January is trying as politely as he can and as gracefully as he can to get people to fuck off so they can get to the wedding bed bit. And then we have this scene, this truly awful scene of their first night. On January hath fast in his arm is tak, his fresher May, his paradise, his mark. He lulleth her, he kisseth her full oft, with thick bristles of his beard unsoft.
Oh!
Lick to the skin of houndfish, sharp as brayer.
Oh, what?
For he was sharp all new in his manner. So it's saying his skin is like a shark's because he's so freshly shaven.
Oh. Oh.
He rubbeth here about her tender face, and said thus, alas, immot trespass. To you me spose, and you greatly offend, ere time come that he will doon descend. But natheless considereth this, quod he, there is no workman whatsoever he be, that may both work well and hastily. This will be done at leisure perfectly. It is no force how long that we play. In true wedlock coupled we be tway, and blessed be the yoke that we be in. For in our actus we mo do no sin. A man may do no sin with his wife, nay hurt himself and with his own a kniff. For we han live to play us be the law. Thus laboureth he till that day gone daw. So he's like, I'm sorry to have to trespass against you. But also, it said, no workman can work both quickly and well, and I want to do the job right.
Oh.
And we can all night long.
Oh. And I'm sure she's like, great.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, it's even said, like, later, it's for his working, she thought not a deal. Like she was like, yeah, that weren't shit.
You're bad at this.
So the next day, and this is very in keeping with medieval understandings of women's sexuality too. Like, women are like
horny,
ravenous. Like, he can't satisfy her, this 60-year-old man, even if he does go all night. So the morning comes, he goes off to do nightly manner things. She stays in bed for 4 days, as is customary, doing, I don't know what, playing with ye old Hitachi or whatever. And
wait, would ye old Hitachi just have be attached to like a water wheel, a bunch of peasants like jogging on it, like?
Yeah, it's like the bit in Conan the Barbarian where he's just like strapped to the thing. That's actually where the phrase "strapping young lad" comes from.
Okay, carry on.
So in the meantime, January discovers that one of his squires actually, a man named Damien, has taken to his bed. What he doesn't know is that Damien has taken to his bed because he has so fallen into love sickness on seeing May that he just can't function. He's so in love with her, he must have her. And so he contrives to take to his bed, and he writes a letter to May, confessing his love in the hopes that at some point he will have the chance to give it to her. When May comes down out of seclusion, January is basically like, hey, my squire Damien, who has served me so well, is sick. Go and ply your womanly charms, ask after him, see that, he's healing well. I'll be down just as soon as I'm done taking a nap.
This is going to go so well.
I don't think he ever does come down, by the way. So she goes to Damien, and Damien, all the ladies cluck over him like hens. It's very much this misogynistic image of the gaggle of women. And during this, Damien contrives to, slip the letter into her pocket. She goes back to their chambers where January is still napping. He immediately pounces on her and is like, take your clothes off. They get in my way. They have more horrible sex. And then later, May reads this letter from Damien confessing his love and his desire to have her. And she's like, I'm a good woman and this guy is hurting. And I'm going to help him with my vagina. And so she sends a note back to Damien, basically detailing a plan.
It is bonkers that too goes back that far. Just I'm so sad that you have to have sex with me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this shows up several times even in the Canterbury Tales. So they go into this little bit where they talk about how January has this private garden that only he and May have access to. He alone has he has a clicket, a padlock on the gate, and he alone has the key. In part because, it's such a nice garden, he likes to have it all to himself and May's, and also partly because he likes to go and fuck in the garden. So it's just for him. It's his garden.
His garden.
And so May decides to try and have a rendezvous with Damien in the garden, and they have a key secretly made. But something bad happens as time passes, and January wakes one day having been stricken blind.
What?
Because he's old.
Oh.
Sure. He's old. Old people go blind, apparently. I don't know. It's not important. What's important is that he is blind.
Okay.
And so January laments after the loss of his youth and his vigor. You know, he's blind. He was this young, scrapping man of 60, and now he's blind. He also starts to be sort of jealous and wary of his wife being out of his proverbial sight. And so he starts to not allow her to leave their chambers or like the dining hall or whatnot to go walk about the grounds or anything like that unless he has his hand around her arm. So now we have this further complication.
I think I have a feeling what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So May hatches a plan. She says to her husband, let's go cheer up. Let's go walk in the garden. You love to walk in the garden. So they go to the garden. Damien has already snuck into the garden using his key that they've made.
Mm-hmm.
And she signals to him to climb up a pear tree and wait for her. She and January walk for some time in the gardens. They chat, they reminisce, whatever, you know, you do when you're walking around these like old Romanesque gardens. And then she says to her husband, she's like, I want one of those pears so bad. There's this moment in which she implies that she's pregnant. No, like,
Okay.
It's not really touched on again, but she says, like, women in my condition can take such cravings, and they can be so bad that we might die if they're not fulfilled. And I want one of those pears, but alas, I can't reach them. And January's like, if I had my sight, I would reach them for you, but I can't. She's like, well, you know, if you were to permit me to put my foot on your back and give me a boost up, I could probably get into the tree and get a pear myself. And he's like, yeah, I'll totally do that. Now, Pluto and Proserpina, who in this are depicted as like a fairy king and queen. Mm-hmm. This is fairly common in like medieval and even in early modern literature when you want to have like the Greek gods, but you don't want to get too blasphemous by depicting them as actually godlike, is to depict them as fairies.
Sure.
And even like Augustine at one point suggests that like the Greek and Roman gods were basically like fairies or demonic spirits mistaken for gods. Pluto sees this and he's like, this is how women are. Women are terrible, and I'm gonna help poor G out by like giving him his sight back so he can see what this horrible wife of his is up to.
Mm-hmm.
And Proserpina is like, you know, you can do that, but I'm gonna make sure that she has an answer ready to get out of this. Because, you know, you men, you're never happy. No matter how faithful we are, you're always accusing. You always have some accusation to make. And so I'm going to make sure that she can talk her way out of this. And the funny thing is, there's this running theme in the story of like men being rightfully angry and women talking their way out of it with their womanly wiles. And even here in this exchange between Pluto and Proserpina, it's presented as like she's doing that to him. Like he's in the right. He's trying to help this guy out whose wife's about to cheat on him, and she's making him the bad guy. And like she like berates him about it until he's like, peace, I won't disagree with you anymore. Like I'm going to give him back his sight because I've said that I will, and I'm a king, and God forbid a king be made a liar. But you do your thing and make sure that she has her answer ready.
Solidarity.
May climbs up into the tree, and then the scene in which, like, it literally, like, I can't remember the exact line, but it's basically like Damien pulls up her smock and puts it right in, like an outright. It's just like and thrusts it right in. And January's sight suddenly comes back to him, and he looks up and he's like, "What the f***? Why is my wife this guy in a pear tree?"
Uh-huh.
She's like, "Oh my God, husband, you have your sight back. I'm so glad. I had read in my books that the best way to help a blind man to regain his sight was for his eyes to light upon what seemed to be his wife entangled with another man. And so I conspired to make that happen." And he's like, "Don't bullshit me. I saw you." Like, he was full on inside of you.
And she's like, "Bitch, you got your sight back, didn't you?"
But she's like, "Alas, it didn't work. You don't have your sight back. Clearly, you just caught some glimpse and are now again struck blind. For if your sight were truly back, you could not have seen this thing that didn't happen. And you have to think about how, like, a man who has just woken up from a dream can't fully trust his senses. He has to take a minute to take in the room. And likewise, a man who has been blind shouldn't trust the first glimpse that he sees. He has to wait and let his vision adjust. And he is like, I guess you're right. Like, I must not have seen that. And she's like, see, you can't always trust what your eyes are seeing. In fact, when your sight is coming back, you may for some time think that you saw things that you didn't see. You may yet see more things that you didn't see.
This is incredible logic. And I also love the idea of her being like, yeah, I was just flipping through the trotula and it said that if I wanted to make you not blind anymore, I had to this hot guy.
It is the epitome of gaslight gatekeep girl boss.
Yeah,
it's all
queen.
There. There's a gate, there's gaslighting, everything.
Incredible. We stan a girl boss.
So what we kind of walk away from. Oh, and of course, like, Harry Bailey comes in. He's like, this is a great story. Also, I have a bitch wife, too. I just want to throw that out there. Like, my wife is a horrendous nag.
Excuse me, no story to tell. Just wanted to say, my wife.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Fragment 4 is one of those ones where, like, the two stories are deeply connected, right? Because we have this idea that this is what the perfect marriage looks like. It's this woman who's perfectly subservient to her husband's will, never complains, never grouches, never dudes in a pear tree. Like, think about the mechanics of that.
It's very athletic.
How does that have to be working?
Especially in, like, a skirt. Like a full-length skirt.
Yeah. Was he, like, hanging from it? Like what? Especially if you've ever seen a pear tree, like, they're not like super big.
No.
But so on the flip side, we have this idea that, like, this is reality. Like, women are horrible. They're unconstant. They'll cook old men. They are, like, constant slaves to their desires. And when we ask this question of, like, which one is Chaucer being serious about, like, I think we have to actually think that it's both. Because, like we said, like, if Walter's a dick, then God's a dick. So Walter can't be a dick. Like, if this relationship is like the relationship between Job and God, then this is a good thing. It is fine for a husband to torment his wife, and it is good for her to be long-suffering about it. Like, that's how a good marriage works. And when we look at some of the other women characters that appear in the Canterbury Tales, and this is why I find it so funny that so many people see the wife of Bath as this character that is, like, self-consciously feminist, I think this is what Chaucer thinks most women are like. Lascivious, untrustworthy. I mean, the wife of Bath is constantly looking for her next husband. In one of the later tales, I think that it's the Monk's Tale, we'll have this, like, love triangle. But the thing that is funny is that, like, Chaucer himself had a fairly happy marriage.
Well, part of what it makes me think of is, I feel like there's a type of kind of, like, religious dude that we've sort of lost as the culture wars have gotten worse and worse. You used to encounter a lot more people, especially men, who would espouse some, like, pretty f***ed up beliefs about, if you were like, is this what a marriage should be? They'd be like, yeah, like, ideally, in, like, a perfect world, if you had two perfectly religious people, this is how this would go. But also, like, that's just not how people work. And it feels like there's a thing there where it's like, sure, from Chaucer's perspective, there's this ideal, And he's like, but also like literally no one, man or woman, ever lives up to an ideal. And like that's just people. Like people just be people. And
the thing is, I think the religious element is really important to it, because I think part of what Chaucer is getting at is that this idea that, like, for a marriage to work and be blissful and happy and all of that, the core of that marriage, and this is not necessarily the core of most marriages in the Middle Ages, the core of that marriage has to be love, not like desire. January marries because he wants an heir and he wants to have sex.
right.
Walter marries a woman that he sees and is like, she is perfect. Walter is in love with Griselda. But it's a love that is distinctly in like religious terms. It's not the type of love that we think of that's very romantic love. It's more this sort of like Christian love, that like agape, that sort of the love that is between, man and God.
Yeah.
When that's the love between, husband and wife, when it's this like religious love of sort of like worship and whatnot.
It's a calling.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's love as calling, which is like a different wavelength than normal romantic love.
Yeah. And I think you can see it in the way in which there's this Job-like character to Griselda, but there's also maybe a bit of a Marian character in the way in which, and I mean, one could even argue, Mary also suffers her like trials and tribulations for obedience to God. She has to flee to Egypt, and she sees her son crucified and all of this. Walter, in the sort of like God position, alights on Griselda because she is a worthy vessel for his love. Like even when we don't get into that sort of question of like immaculate conception and whatnot, and like whether or not Mary was sinless or free from original sin, like you still end up with a version of Mary that is, I think, consistent across all forms of Christianity, who is a woman of sort of like perfect grace and patience and obedience.
Yes.
And so, like, there's also that religious element where it's like, Griselda is a woman who is fit to be a wife because she is already a woman of perfect Christian virtue.
Right.
Even before Walter decides to marry her, he decides to marry her because she works all day and doesn't gossip and never backtalks her father.
Well, I, for one, am going to go find a husband that I can prostrate myself before so that I can be the perfect vessel for his love.
See, this women so inconstant.
Mawwiage, twoo wove is what brought us together today.
I think there would be a great conversation to be had, actually, between like some of these tales in the like sort of constant woman group, Constance, the Man of Law's tale, Griselda and the Clerk's tale, and Buttercup. Because I think like I don't know. I don't know enough about what's his face who wrote The Princess Bride to know like what his sort of literary background and literary chops were. But like honestly, it wouldn't shock me if there's some sort of consciously subversive relationship between like Buttercup and the other ones.
Well, because what the Princess Bride is a constant husband story.
Yeah.
Wesley is playing the role of constant wife.
Yeah, I mean, he is Constance. He gets lost at sea and goes to all these misadventures and like...
And never, ever wavers and is borderline saintly in his willingness to endure suffering.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, what's his whole line is, as you wish. Like, how Griselda could that be?
As you wish. Oh, my sweet Wesley.
That scene, that movie has some of the best physical comedy of any film. That scene and the way she's just like, she could just run down that hill, but just throws herself tumbling after him, like pure art.
All right, I need you to do like a full medieval reading of The Princess Bride at some point.
All right, this is the way. A friend of mine was suggesting that I submit a paper to Leeds next year. Maybe this will be my paper. No medieval game studies for me. I'll just go and do a comparative analysis of Griselda and Wesley.
Yes. Oh my God. Please do. Also, you still haven't watched A Knight's Tale, and I'm disappointed in you personally.
How do you know I haven't?
Because if you had, you would have started this recording session by saying, oh my God, I finally watched A Knight's Tale, and you were correct.
Yeah, that's fair. That's on me. You Yeah, I haven't watched it yet.
That's all right.
I did make a comparison between the new Decameron and The Knight's Tale the other day in classic lit major fashion, having not watched one of those.
Well, now you have to go watch it. What are our closing thoughts here on Mawwiage?
I think one of the things that is really interesting to me about marriage in medieval literature is that it is something that is always talked about in the most extreme terms. And I think this is something that to me is really interesting in the way in which I think we still do this. Like, I think we still talk about marriage in the most extreme terms. I think this is something that is carried through into modern television and film and stuff like that. Like, you look at marriages and like sitcoms and stuff, and you always have this idea of marriage as either like this thing that's like the perfect relationship. There's always those perfect relationships in television and film, or as this thing that is just a series of like comical mishaps.
Yeah. There's sitcom marriage and there's drama marriage and nothing in between.
And like it's so funny because like it doesn't leave a ton of room for like what marriage is really like, but like I don't know, like as a married woman, I think that is something that almost speaks to this real thing about like the understanding of marriage that we have, which is that like you're only ever hearing about people's extremes about it. Like there's no actual realistic way to depict a marriage because like you just have to kind of be in one.
Yeah, well, and like a realistic depiction of a marriage is super boring to anyone who's not in it. Healthy love is a very boring thing to observe and a very wonderful thing to have.
Yeah. No, I mean,
it's just like we woke up today and we had no major conflicts. It was lovely.
We made a blueberry cobbler. What a great story.
Woo!
I also think it's one of those things that it's like a realistic marriage is also so filtered through like confirmation bias and either negativity or positivity bias, depending on how you're looking at it. Of course, like for the merchant who only sees the ways in which he doesn't like his relationship with his wife, a realistic marriage is just this horrible thing. I also think the other thing that really like sticks with me with these stories in terms of like how they continue to be relevant into the modern day is the fact that much like academics, I think the way we talk about marriage is one of those things that just hasn't changed.
No.
Like how many men do you know who still have like one of these two views of marriage or both of them?
Yeah.
It's easy and fun to make jokes about the merchant being like, I hate my wife, I miss you, Susan, call me. But like, how is he meaningfully different from that guy? Like this is,
extremely divorced man energy has been one of the great shaping forces of the last 10 years.
Yeah. Who would love The Merchant's Tale is Elon Musk. He'd be like, God damn it, this is This is exactly what Grimes did to me with the chick from the Pentagon Papers. I think some of my favorite, like, I love watching Elon Musk not only be the most divorced man in history, but also this, like, massive transphobe. And just watching him take L's on, like, both of those at the same time. Like, oh, my daughter who won't talk to me anymore is a trans woman. Oh, my wife left me for a trans woman. Get muskrat.
It really is. It's impressive. But, like, to your point, it shouldn't be so straightforward. When I say divorced man energy, everyone knows exactly what you mean. They're just like, yes, a thing I immediately understand and can recognize in the wild. And, like, you don't wind up with divorced man energy without starting from a fundamental place of being like, I don't have a healthy understanding of what a marriage is, and that's why I still don't understand why mine ended. And I'm mad about it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that about does us for today. Yes? No?
Yeah. Sorry, I always, to some degree, I always forget because I can see you that, like, the audience can't, but yeah.
It's an audio medium.
I'm back here smiling, thumbs up. I'm gonna start doing the, like, audio description thing. Like...
Yeah, there you go. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me again.
I enjoyed the latest stop on our pilgrimage, and, before too long, we'll get back on our donkeys and, I don't know, make some more dick jokes. And I'm sure it'll be great.
Just as Chaucer would have wanted.
Exactly. Thank all of you for being here with us today. Just a reminder that if you want to help us keep making the show, we do have merch now. We have t-shirts, we have tote bags, we have dad hats. We have divorced dad hats, if that's your vibe. I don't think we have any particularly Chaucerian designs in the shop yet, but maybe we will soon. And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really use the love. Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, recorded, and edited by me, Grace Todd. You can follow the show on Instagram or Twitter @didntreadit.
Our theme song is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
For sources cited and a full list of episodes, you can visit us at didntreaditpod.com.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review. It makes a big difference, and we appreciate it immensely.
If you did not enjoy the show, we are accepting applications for a full-time nemesis at didntreaditpod@gmail.com. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia, and to Pesca Trio Publishing.